All right, rejoining the channel is Moochie award-winning military reporter Kevin Maurer, our good friend from many years ago. Kevin, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Your most recent article at Rolling Stone, the headline is Fellow Unit Member Says Alleged DC Shooter Felt Abandoned by CIA. Rahmanullah Lakenwal was the Afghan national who shot two West Virginia National Guardsmen in Washington, D.C. last Friday near the Farragut West metro station, which is only about 2 blocks away from the White House. Your reporting provides some insights into who this guy is.
When they first put this out, it was a radicalized terrorist attack. Every bit of reporting that I've done since then, it's not. There's no indication he was radicalized. Internally, sources, within the administration are saying that they have no evidence of his being internalized despite these public statements. What this looks like it mirrors a lot of the mental health issues that our own veterans suffer from. It's a guy who was on the front foot of the CIA secret army, took part in decades worth of high intensity commando style, killer capture missions. And then after the evacuation is here, has language issues, has culture issues, has mental health issues, and was under tremendous pressure because his immigration documents had cost him a job, and now he wasn't being able to pay for his family. It's a tragedy. It's another example of the sort of the wreckage that has been left by 20 years of forever war.
A lot of our viewers may not have ever heard of the CIA Zero units. Can we give a brief overview as to what those are? How long have they been around? And how did this guy get kind of recruited to be part of the Zero unit in Afghanistan?
Essentially, those Zero units, I first bumped into them in 2004 at Abbottabad at a special forces base. They're the CIA secret army. They were recruited to do commando style missions, track and raid high profile targets on the CIA list. The thing about it is, and this kind of goes against the narrative that he wasn't vetted, is that nobody volunteered to be in the Zero units. You can't just sign up. You have to be recommended. So it's usually a family member that recommends you for the unit, and then once you're there, the CIA vets you. They put you on probation, and you work your way up to being on a frontline, team. Mark Wayne Mullen, the senator from Oklahoma, called him the top 1% of Afghan soldiers, and he's absolutely right.
Yes, vetted. Yes, you got to be the top 1% of Afghan soldiers. But the nature of the Zero unit missions were kind of off the reservation.
This was a clandestine unit chasing the CIA's, top tier targets. And that kind of clandestine nature of this unit impacted their ability to get immigration status because they couldn't prove that they worked with the CIA because the CIA refused to acknowledge them. So that created a kind of a catch-22 of how do you get special immigration visas for working with the U.S. government when the U.S. government won't acknowledge that you even existed. Quickly going back to the vetting, I mean, this was also a unit that never suffered an insider attack. And for those that don't follow Afghanistan as closely, you saw those reports of Afghan soldiers, attacking U.S. soldiers inside the base. Never happened to a Zero unit guy. The vetting process and the guys that they were able to recruit never led to that kind of attack.
During my 20-year Navy career, I had the pleasure of serving in 4 different F-14 Tomcat squadrons, and each one of them influenced me in a variety of ways, and not just tactically. For instance, during our downtime when I was an instructor in VF-101, the F-14 Training Squadron, my commanding officer taught me to appreciate a good single malt scotch. That's remained my drink of choice since those amazing days more than 30 years ago. So now I'm pleased to join Winglore as a brand ambassador. Winglore is a spirit company founded by 4 former military aviators, 3 Air Force and 1 Marine Corps. Carlos, Stroke, Trip, and Easy, who've channeled their airborne precision and warfighting esprit into a quality product. Check out this bottle of Nickel on the Grass single malt. It just oozes authenticity. Look at that logo and the instructions on the wrapper that reads, remove after flight. And then down here at the bottom is the word bingo, which is a reference to the code word that means you're out of fuel. And then around the neck is this dedication. To fighter pilots, a nickel is worth much more than 5 cents. Throwing a nickel on the grass has become a universal toast to the courage and sacrifice of fallen pilots. To those legendary spirits, We salute you and blue skies forever. Roger that, gents. So when your debrief is done, head for the place where sea stories are told and celebrate mission success with Winglore, made in the USA. And you can join the Winglore Squadron and actually become an owner of the company by clicking on this QR code. Must be at least 21 years old. Something I've never understood is the differentiation between the CIA paramilitary units and a Tier 1 outfit. You've covered both. You've been downrange amidst both. For the viewer, what is the basic difference, and where does an active duty military unit's mission end and the CIA mission begin?
That is the grayest area, especially around these units in Afghanistan. In fact, SEAL Team 6 operators used to embed with the zero units and the paramilitary so they could call in airstrikes. It's just an administrative thing. There was an administrative, I forgot, was it Title 10 and Title 50? There's different titles on who governs and your chain of command and where you fall under, but the missions were cross-pollinated.
Well, but you just said Title 10 and Title 50. That differentiation is pretty gigantic in terms of rules of engagement, authorities. Right. Obviously, when you say CIA, it's traditionally been associated with undercover, shadowy, black ops kind of a thing. If you take that impressionable young kid, you put him into these circumstances, he does perform, he survived. That's its own sort of measure of excellence. Summarily, the war is over and he gets repatriated because he deserves it. And then he descends on our shores. And then what?
He gets here much like every other veteran, or more than 80,000 Afghans that were evacuated. There's out of that about 10,000 were these zero unit guys who, during the evacuation, helped hold the airport. They were running missions out to rescue people, bring them back to the airport, and they were sort of instrumental in holding the airport during the evacuation. They sort of just land on shore. There's organizations like Famil Gita Bakshi's organization that have been formed and stood up to help try to, guide these veterans through the immigration process, get them set up, help them with resettlement. But many of them arrived with just what they had, what they were able to get, and they walked on the plane. So it's a tremendous uphill fight for this community to get assimilated. It's not easy. And then you factor in language and culture. You wonder what that pressure must have been like. And I've seen it on all of them.
So he settled in Bellingham after bopping around the country, various places, sort of an Afghan enclave. Is that an accurate description of where he lived?
He was in the process of trying to move to a larger Afghan community because he felt isolated in Bellingham. And his nephew, in an application to the housing authority there, was asking for permission to move to Seattle to be part of a larger Afghan community because, he didn't feel safe. Allegedly, he was attacked at one point, which required him to go to the hospital. And so I think he felt isolated. And the AP had a really good story about some of the advocates who were really concerned about neglecting the kids, manic episodes, deeply depressed. And so it looked like, based on that reporting and the folks I talked to, he was really suffering from some sort of mental illness, and that was impacting his ability to not only live his life, but also to provide for his family.
What is it that agencies like the CIA or the government should do at this point to make it right for people that we do owe the consideration for the effort they did in support of us during the war in Afghanistan?
We've got a pattern in the United States for abandoning our allies. I mean, it goes back to the Montagnards. It's the Kurds after the Gulf War. It's the Afghans. It's the Afghans now. What's ironic is the first time the CIA actually acknowledges the existence of the zero unit program, the zero units was this event and was to say that they shouldn't be here, which I think resonated deeply with this organization who fought shoulder to shoulder with the CIA. I think they were taken aback by being told that they didn't belong here. And that was that came from the CIA director. But what it tells me is, and I say this in the piece, that American loyalty seems to have an expiration date. As soon as you become not useful, you become expendable. And I think it's a terrible track record, and it's not the only time. And I think the U.S. Americans need to think about that going forward, because it's our track record for taking care of our allies is abysmal.
Yeah, and we never do think about that going into conflict. There's a couple of things we never think about. One is the care of our wounded veterans when they come home. The post 9/11 wars were a great example of how poorly we prepared for that wave of wounded vets and scandals at Walter Reed and the VA claims backlogs and all the other stuff that we had to work through on the backside of that march to war. So again, this Afghan, basically war refugee, Rahmanullah Lakenwal, 29 years old, is facing first-degree murder charges after he killed Army Specialist Sarah Beckstrom, who's only 20 years old, and critically wounded Air Force Staff Sergeant Andrew Wolf, who's only 24 years old. They were both members of the West Virginia National Guard who were serving on patrol in Northwest Washington, D.C. So there's no way to characterize that other than a huge tragedy. But the way that the administration, particularly President Trump, has framed it is immigrants are bad. These people are all horrible people from a horrible country, and they all need to be kicked out. And that leaves out what you and I have seen being in Afghanistan and what we know to be true in terms of what we owe to those who tried to help us prevail under the promise of a new life in their country. That's why they did it. There was this promise of freedom, of removing them from the tyranny of Islamist fundamentalists like the Taliban. And so they believed the promise for 20 years, and then they were just left hanging. And not everybody got out. As you mentioned, 80,000 Afghans did return to the United States, but there's hundreds of thousands who were left in great peril because they helped us. The Taliban know who helped the United States and our allies while we were there. And a number of those folks have been imprisoned or executed as a function of that. Categorically, to paint the entire community with a broad brush like that is unfair.
And it's inaccurate. I mean, every one of the zero units veterans I spoke to condemn Lockenwall's actions. It's the antithesis of what they did for decades of protecting and serving shoulder to shoulder with American CIA paramilitary. But at the end of the day, I mean, this is a good. They're concerned about being, the scrutiny now. They're concerned about being painted into this with the same brush and being condemned for this one guy's actions. To me, this story is sort of a microcosm of the wreckage of 20 years of war. These guys were true believers. They fought. Many of them died. Their brothers died. Almost all of them have been wounded. They sacrificed for the promise of a better country. That country's gone now. Many of them have flags up in their homes of a country that doesn't exist anymore. They're tattooed those flags on their bodies. That country doesn't exist anymore. They believed in the American promise. And now we, I think, as a country, owe them a chance to live the best life they can here in the United States.
And none of that is to let Lockenwall off the hook for allegedly committing murder.
In fact, Lockenwall should be punished to the fullest extent of the law for his crimes if he's convicted. Because that's America. That's how it works. You do this, you get punished. But don't punish every single Afghan who is here in the United States doing their best to have a life. The tragedy of this is that, this guy slipped through the cracks.
Our thoughts are with the family of Specialist Sarah Beckstrom. Terrible loss, but we want to make sure that the entire community isn't punished as a result of the actions of Rahmanullah Lakenwal. So, Kevin, always great to have you on the channel. Thank you for this reporting. Again, the article is in Rolling Stone titled "Fellow Unit Member Says Alleged DC Shooter Felt Abandoned by the CIA." The author is our good friend Kevin Maurer, the Moochie award-winning Kevin Maurer. Hopefully we can get you one again this year. So until then, thanks for the time, Kevin. I hope to see you again in real life before too long.
Sounds good. I look forward to it.
Hunter. All right, that'll do it for this episode. If you're not already a subscriber, become one so you don't miss anything. And in the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again very soon.